We can't half-ass boundaries. You want to put your whole ass into your boundaries. Like both cheeks, we're really showing up here and doing the work. Hi everybody, thanks for coming back. I'm wearing the most fabulous giant pink sweater and I'm feeling very excited about it because we're talking about boundaries. It's one of my favorite things. I endlessly pester my clients about this and I love to talk about it. So let's just get into it. So we have talked about boundaries on the channel before, way back when I was yelling into the ether. None of you beautiful people were here watching my channel. So we're gonna redo the video and kind of talk about it more in depth now that I am older, wiser, and have some better advice about boundaries. And also now that you guys are actually here and watching. So boundaries are kind of a hot topic because a lot of people have misunderstandings in terms of how to implement boundaries, in terms of what boundaries actually are, and how to sort of use boundaries for good and not evil. One of the key things that's important to understand about boundaries, and one of the things that I will continue to repeat over and over and over again, is that boundaries are not a way for us to control other people. Say it with me. Boundaries are not a way for us to control other people. We cannot use boundaries to manipulate others or to force people to behave in the way that we want them to behave. Boundaries are a process and a framework that we can implement into our own lives to protect ourselves. Kind of the classic example that I give my clients is this concept of the energy vampire. These are the friends, family members, acquaintances who always need to talk to you about how terrible their day is going, about how fucked up their life is, about how overwhelmed they are, about how they are just drowning in their emotion, right? Which is very valid and very normal and something that is very human and a lot of people experience. However, if that person is not making space in their life for you to do the same thing and they're just kind of taking and taking and taking and never giving back to you, they might be an energy vampire. Not that this is shameful, not that this is bad. However, this can be problematic because there is a limit to what people can put up with and to what people can give, because it's very cliche and like such a therapist thing to say, but we can't pour from an empty cup. And so if you are the friend who is always pouring shit out of your cup to help someone else and no one is putting anything back in your cup, you're gonna run out of stuff in your cup. And that is not ideal for you. It's not fair for you. It also, doesn't bode well for your mental health. So boundaries are, again, this process and this framework for us to protect ourselves and to preserve a little bit of that liquid in your cup so that you can still be supportive, you can still love these people, and you can still have a relationship with them, but just in a healthier way, just in a way that allows you to say, love you the most, but also like I need to reserve some of this for myself. Again, sort of the standard or like normal perception of boundary setting is that boundaries are like a very therapist-y thing or like therapy-y thing that are like cringy and awkward. Boundary setting does not have to be cringy or awkward. It is totally possible for you to set boundaries either verbally or non-verbally with the people in your life. That doesn't sound like you've all sat down to have a group therapy session. In part 2, I'm going to give you guys some examples about boundaries and I'm going to talk about specific language that you can use with boundary setting. So stay tuned for that. But again, boundary setting is something that over time, as you practice it, will start to feel more authentic and you can use verbiage and language that sounds like you so that it doesn't sound like you're parroting the advice that your therapist gave you. It is totally possible to get to that place. It will be a little bit clunky and weird at first, but if you keep practicing it and you keep implementing them, again, it will get easier over time. Okay, so the other thing about boundaries that I wanted to touch on here, again, I've already talked about this, but I really want to continue to drive this point home. Boundaries are not a way that we can control or manipulate other people. So when we're talking about boundary setting, we are communicating, these are the things that I will and will not put up with. This is the way that I feel I deserve to be treated. These are my expectations for my relationships. We are not communicating to another person, you will treat me this way, you will say this, or you will not say this, because we can't control other people. We can't force someone to do something or not do something. So let's say, for example, a friend of yours says something to you that's hurtful or calls you a name that hurts your feelings. You can communicate to that friend, that really hurt my feelings, please don't call me that anymore. But we can't force them to communicate in a different way, right? Like we can't force them to not say that hurtful thing. So the boundary setting process is kind of 2 parts. The first part is communicating, wow, I really didn't like that. And the second part is setting up some expectations for a consequence. So if your boundary is violated, what are you gonna do? The consequence part of boundary setting is super duper duper important to talk about because if you set a consequence for your boundary being violated that you can't actually stick to, you're essentially encouraging the behavior. The thing that I say all the time and annoy my clients with is that the behaviors that we allow are the behaviors that we encourage. So if you're not able to stick to that consequence, don't set it. Set something that feels more feasible. The consequence for your boundary being violated doesn't have to be wild or outlandish. Sometimes it's very simple. Sometimes it's more nuanced. But again, it has to be something that feels feasible for you. Some of the recommendations that I offer clients are like, I'm going to end this conversation. I'm going to get up and leave the room. I am going to spend less and less time with you. I'm not going to initiate contact with you. I don't want to be around you when blah, blah, blah. These are all things that I can control, right? Because I am removing myself from a situation. I am not sending that text message. I am, choosing to disengage from a conversation, et cetera, et cetera. So the reason that this is important is because if we're not able to stick to the boundary, essentially what you're teaching the people in your life is that your boundaries don't matter. And so even if you actually pluck up the courage to say, hey, I didn't like that, please don't do that. If you do that, I'm going to X, Y, and Z, and then you don't make good on that and they violate your boundary again and again and again, essentially what they've learned is like they're communicating for no reason. And you've done all of that emotional labor and like been brave and courageous for no reason. So don't waste your own fucking time. Don't set yourself up for failure, and don't set a consequence for your boundary that you can't stick to. Again, consequences for boundaries don't have to be big and pronounced. Sometimes it's a lack of action rather than implementing a new action. So keep that in mind. In the second video, we're going to talk more about what boundary setting can actually look like, and I'll give you some examples and some example consequences and things like that. So again, stay tuned for part 2. We'll talk about that in more detail. But the takeaway from this is that when we do the boundary setting, we can't half-ass boundaries. You want to put your whole ass into your boundaries. Like both cheeks, we're really showing up here and doing the work, because if you put in half, you're wasting your own time. I think that's where we're going to cut it for part 1. We will talk more in part 2 about more boundary setting stuff. But if you guys have questions, comments, concerns, please put them in the comments. You know I love to chat with you. And yeah, subscribe to the channel because we have videos like this and other Therapist Reacts fun stuff, and I would love to have you stay. That's it. Share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow, and I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.